Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Capretta, and I am the project coordinator at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. And I'm going to kick off this panel discussion so that we do not lose any of our valuable speakers' time. We have leaders from across the state here to talk about family engagement. We're really excited to hear from them. I want to one more time welcome you to the inaugural Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We are glad that you could join us on this day as we try to take family school community partnership to the next level. This is session 11, the panel discussion with district leaders about family school community partnership right now. I'm excited to learn from these leaders, and I hope you are too. If you have questions for the presenters, feel free to use the chat feature. We'll probably not stop at that moment to take the question, but we'll try to pass things on as they're relevant. And always feel free to join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag leading the launch. So we're just going to jump in here and get started today. I'm actually going to let our distinguished panelists introduce themselves to kick off our conversation. And I'm actually going to take down the slide deck so that you can see us all talking. Let me, oops, now you see my pandas. Sorry about that. Okay, so now that you've seen the beautiful red pandas, now hopefully you can see our beautiful faces. And I'm going to kick it off with a simple question. I'm going to call on each presenter to just share their name, their title, where they're coming from, and if you could give us a brief description of the community you serve. So if you wouldn't mind, let's start with Mr. Balzer. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. My name's John Balzer. I'm superintendent of Adena Local Schools. We are a rural district in south central Ohio in Ross County, about 15 minutes west of Chillicothe. We are a large area, 128 square miles, with a smaller population of about 1,200 students total. It runs about 9.8 students per square mile. The unique aspect of our district is that we have a group of economically disadvantaged children paired with a group of somewhat economically stable children who live on the larger farms in the area. So we have a duality of farms and Section 8 housing, or it'd be low-income housing complexes that are scattered throughout the area. So we've learned to deal with that and how we engage the different groups.
Thank you, Mr. Balzer. I'll move on now to Ms. Hunt. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Very excited to be here with everyone today. This is such an amazing opportunity to hear practitioners and to connect with you wonderful people, even virtually. So as Tom mentioned, my name is Lisa Hunt, and I hail from the Cleveland Heights, University Heights City School District. Our district serves about 5,500 students, and we have the amazing, unique opportunity to be a part of 3 different municipalities. So University Heights, Cleveland Heights, and South Euclid. And we're also considered an inner ring suburb of Cleveland. So it is an immensely diverse community, I would say, not only in race, class, socioeconomics, all of those pieces. We are a wonderful hodgepodge of culture and age and income. It's just a really diverse community feeding from a lot of the other places around us. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. Moving right along, Ms. Gillison, how are you today?
I am well. I am well. So first, I want to say thank you, Tom, and thank you to Dr. Boone for affording this opportunity to sit on this panel with such distinguished leaders around the state. This is very exciting, and our work is very exciting. I am from Columbus City Schools, and we have been noted as being the largest district in the state of Ohio. We used to say largest urban district, but it is largest district at this point, serving approximately anywhere from 59,000 students to 50,000 students on any given day. Demographics, predominantly 53% of our students are African-American students, 22% white, 13% Hispanic. And when we look at the diversity, like Lisa had mentioned, we are very diverse as well. We've got 17% of our students are identified as New American or immigrant students. And about 18% of our students are students with exceptionalities, special education needs or gifted needs. So pretty excited about this forum, and I can't wait to learn and hear from the other amazing leaders on the panel. And so far today has been awesome.
Thank you. Now we're excited to hear from Mr. Brown. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I intend to take advantage of today to learn as much as I possibly can, because we know there are numbers of things we can do to engage with our families much more than we already are. So I'm looking forward to that. My name is Melvin Brown. I'm the superintendent in Reynoldsburg City Schools, right outside of Columbus. We're a district of about 7,800 kids, extremely diverse. About 64% of our students are students of color. We have about 62% of our students who are on very reduced lunch. And we have an ELL population that continues to grow. We're pushing about 1,300 students in that particular program. And a large number of them happen to be in the poly students. So our diversity is something that we find to be a rich opportunity for us to do some wonderful things in our community and to learn from each other. And how we as a school district engage with our families is crucial to that, to how we're going to be successful in that measure. So I'm just thrilled to be here, and I'll be taking some notes. So thank you.
Thanks, and thank you all for being here. As I'm sure our attendees can see, we tried hard to assemble a diverse cross section of the interesting place that Ohio is. So I hope you see some of your communities reflected across these leaders. I'm just going to keep going and jump into the first question here, and maybe I'll just look to Ms. Gillison to start us off, and then we'll move on from there. But we learned earlier that just like a space launch, family engagement really requires a cross-section of expertise and leaders from your community, from parents, from your school district, to make sure that all students and families can meet their potential. Ms. Gillison, who would you say is on your team when you are working to create family, school, and community partnerships?
Thank you for that question. We start with the end users, right? We start with the students. So we have a team, and we call it our Partnership in Action team. And on that Partnership in Action team, we have a work group of students. We have a work group of parents. We have a work group, a faith-based work group, and social emotional work group. So what we try to do is tie in all the areas of expertise. We have teachers, administrators, and we try to look at, and when you think about Dr. Epstein's work, we try to look at that entire ecosystem and create our Partnership in Action team to ensure that we are, well, I'm not going to say ensure, because Dr. Brown kind of said it. We are working towards ensuring that we are addressing the needs of all of our families. It doesn't matter what background or walk of life, we want to make sure that we address those needs. So we have I'm pretty excited about our Partnership in Action team, because it allows us to look at situations with different lenses and from multiple perspectives. And I think that is something that I'm pretty proud of. And our superintendent, Dr. Talisa Dixon, is pretty excited about as well.
Yeah, I love that. Using that, starting with the end user, I think is such an important way to build a team. Thanks for sharing that. Mr. Balzer, who do you have on your team thinking about partnership?
All right, with our partnership group, we have, for a small district, a lot of people involved. We do have our administrative team. We have parent representatives from each building. We have staff, but also we have reached outside the boundaries of just the building and the people that are involved there. We also have the help of our local counseling service for social emotional support. We use state support team resources when possible, but also we're heavily involved with our local Ross Pike ESC and have developed a county-wide coordination of social services to help us out with this task. We are now, since we have school back in session, beginning to incorporate students and create an inclusive group of them to help us with this project, but we wanted to be sure everything was off and running first before starting that out.
Thanks for sharing, and I appreciate the insight into some of the other organizations that you bring in to make sure that that leadership is kind of dispersed across multiple systems. I think that's always a critical point on a team. Mr. Brown, how about your team?
Sure. For us, we're always going to start with our cabinet level team. We have immediately brainstorm ideas of how we can engage in different ways and how we're going to be nimble about handling situations as they change. Our principals and our teachers are involved in that. From my standpoint, I think we can increase the level of input from our parents, and that's something we'll be working on right after this afternoon. I have another meeting later on today. In addition to that, I meet with my Superintendent Student Advisory Council today, which has pretty much been focused on the student experience and what it's like for kids each day in school. We want to start to shift that group as well to start thinking more of a community-wide basis. We also partner with Adam H. They provide huge service to our community. Nationwide Children's Hospital is one of our biggest partners. They actually have a facility that's connected to one of our high school campuses and service both our students and families. And we also partner with the state support team. We get a lot of support from there. And Franklin County Job and Family Services has been a huge resource for us in expanding the types of opportunities we can provide to our community.
Thanks for sharing. And again, a great example of this, cross sector. I think it was mentioned, Ms. Brooks, in Ms. Brooks' speech, that a lot of times people are looking for schools for things that are more than education. So it's a great team you've got going on. And Ms. Hunt, how about up north in Cleveland Heights, University Heights?
Well, I was sitting here, just like someone mentioned, I was fast and furiously taking notes because this work is so integrated in so many things that we do in regard to family and community engagement. I just kept adding names to my list. And I don't want to be, I would hate to be remiss in talking about our partnership with the SST and you guys at the statewide Family Engagement Center, because you've been critical too. In regards to partnerships and building, I think it was 2016 or 2018, I think it was 2018 when we built the Family Engagement Collaborative for inner ring partners who were doing this work. So it was interesting to it is interesting to think in terms of we're building the capacity as practitioners, but also for our staff. And how do you kind of slice that? Well, it's building those allegiances. And so within our district, we've got a team-based approach. So from our district leadership teams who are building their practice around family engagement and learning, to our building teams that are looking at how do they approach family engagement as an improvement strategy and really wrapping that into the process. But we also believe in the power of our parents in this district. So we've got a very passionate group of parents who are not only representing the exceptional children, but children with other exceptionalities. We also have what I would call citizen-led task forces, where we really make sure that we open it up for people to be part of the decision-making. And I think we have about 8 of those operating, but it is important that we continue to, allow people to be part of the decision-making. And we do that, I think, really well. It is interesting that you don't want to come across as that, you've got it all figured out. And I hope I'm not doing that at all. It really is a practice. And, I love what Michelle always says about start where you are because you're starting. And so much work around our partnership is really, I feel like, taking hold. And I don't know if that's part of the silver lining that COVID provided us, but we're looking at what we do. So some of the things that we were launching, including our national network of partnership schools, was also community learning centers. So when I think about those pockets of partnerships, we've got a supervisor of partnerships I work with our Title I leads in each of our buildings. And so it really is, I don't say it, without knowing I am blessed to be in a district that really is trying to do the work. And we do that ongoing. So I want to make sure I'm counting everyone. But yeah, so I think it's, we're across our system, we're really looking at family and community engagement and continuing to grow.
Thanks for sharing. That was the easy one. Now, we had a great keynote from Miss Brooks this morning, and she mentioned something that stuck out to me. There aren't really unreachable families. There's just families that we haven't really found great ways or efficient ways to reach yet. And a lot of that she talked about starts with trust and getting to whoever our families trust and continuing to build upon that. I'm just wondering from you all as leaders in your district, kind of when you're in your teams, how do you talk about trust? How do you define trust? And then from there, what ways do you kind of intentionally work on developing that with your families and with the community? Mr. Balzer, you kind of talked about how you have a pretty wide geographic area to cover. I'm wondering if you might want to kick us off talking about this topic of trust and how you work to build that across your district.
Well, I will tell you, it took a lot of legwork. When I first arrived at this district about 5 years ago, the first thing I did was ask for people to invite me to their homes, and we had neighborhood meetings. So I was learning the locations throughout the district and meeting the neighbors. And now when I go through the district, I literally know families and faces and names, and they know me. And we try to keep that relationship level consistent throughout the district with all the school employees, whether you're a cook, a bus driver, a teacher, a custodian, an administrator. Everybody knows you work with the schools, and the school sort of serves as the center of community center in our region. When you have a problem, you reach out to the school. We help you. When we have people who are resistant to maybe reaching out, we do a kind of a subversive backhand kind of task where we send an integrated services counselor out to meet with them who can build a one-on-one relationship with them and then work us into their circle of trust and know that we're all on the same team at the same time. And we found that to be very successful for us. I don't know that that would work everywhere, but it's what works for us.
Thank you. And I am sure that your families and community appreciate that groundwork that you put in as well, getting to know their superintendent.
It is something you could do in a small district with 59,000 students. I don't know how you're going to accomplish that, but size is relevant. So that's how we tackled that problem.
I appreciate it. And you teed us up right kind of where I was headed. On kind of the flip side of this, we have a district here with Miss Gillison who has a lot of families to reach out to, maybe in a little bit of a smaller space, but a lot of numbers. How do you guys approach building that trust intentionally?
First, we look at listening to understand. So when you think about what Superintendent Balzer said, you have to get out. And when our superintendent, Dr. Talisa Dixon, first came to the city of Columbus and Columbus City Schools, she held various listening tours, getting out and listening to the community. And then she commissioned me to go out with her in some instances and to explore some communities that we had not really sat down and listened to before. And so here I'm talking about communities where there are various cultures and various backgrounds, but you're not only listening, you're listening to understand. And then once you have that understanding, what are you doing with it? So when you talk about building trust, if someone shares something with you that is a barrier or a challenge, we take that back And then we convene our senior level cabinet meeting to see how we're going to address it. And then we address it. So when communities see that they're sharing a challenge with you, and then you are actually removing the barriers, now we have this two-way communication starting and trust starting. So pretty much that's how we started our trust building exercises with our communities. We also, and we're continuing to do every Tuesday and Thursday since COVID happened, we hold a virtual family engagement hour where families will come on and share information. And the information they share and the questions they have, we use that as fuel. So now we know what you need, and then now we jump into action to address those needs. So it's two-way conversations, and not just listening, but listening to understand.
Thank you. And that listening to understand is resonating with some in the audience. So I really appreciate that, Jim. Moving to Mr. Brown, how about your community? You mentioned that it's pretty diverse. There's a lot of new families to the country coming in, or second generation families. How do you build trust there?
Well, first, not only may there be some interest in the chat box, but also on this panel. That's an excellent way of looking at this in terms of listening to understand. Thank you for that. The whole notion of approaching issues when we tend to hear people say things, we're automatically preparing ourselves to respond. Sometimes we just need to pause, listen, soak it in, and really comprehend what's being given to us. For us, I arrived here 3 years ago with part of my mission to restore trust and get us in a position where we could work together as a community to get things done. So initially, I had meetings with almost everybody. Probably my first 4 months, I was meeting with community partners throughout the entire time. And I thought that was important in order for them to know who I was and what we were trying to do for the district, but also to hear what those issues were. In addition to that, our teams then begin doing some of those things as well. And honestly, this is an area that we can never do well enough. I think we can continue to grow in this area. We're formulating committees and programs now that allow for additional voice. We sent just past Tuesday at a board meeting. We looked at our policy for our community action groups and how that should be composed. So we'll be tweaking much of that over the next few weeks. And given this area in which we're in right now, we have to be very creative and purposeful about how we go about doing that. And we're having different conversations than we probably have ever had in the history of education. And it's challenging us, it's pushing us to our boundaries, and that is both scary and exciting at the same time. So we continue to try to engage with different segments of our community. And the poly population has a huge voice here. We have a number of contacts within that community that allow us to interact specifically with them, including our city council. We have the first Bhutanese male who's been elected in the country. We're extremely proud of that. And he works very well with our school district to be able to service our community in that regard. In addition to the other folks on city council, it looks very different than it has in the past. And it's given us an opportunity to go out and really reach segments of our community that may not have been heard before.
Thank you. And I love the callback to working with your city council and other types of arenas that people might be looking to for information or advocacy from on their behalf. So I really love to hear when those things come together like that. Moving over to Ms. Hunt, you actually mentioned an interesting challenge yourself. You work for a school district that is serving kind of like 3 different municipalities or cities. So how do you guys approach trust and things like that when kids might be on different sports teams or like not get to do these types of recreational activities together? How do you address some of those trust challenges?
That's a great question, Tom. Even though we're different municipalities, we are all under the CHUH district umbrella. So we all come together as one Tiger Nation. But it is, it's ongoing. And so when I think about trust, I think of it as relational trust. And so we're sharing that messaging far and wide within our district. And I think it's been really powerful for us to proclaim partnerships, right? To proclaim that we're a partnership district, because it sends that signal, far and wide, that we want families to be stakeholders at the table. We want them to be learning as we learn, and also understanding that it's our responsibility as the educational institution to roll out that red carpet and be that welcoming entity and open the doors in various ways. I didn't mention that we do have a refugee population that is English language, that we're grateful for the partnerships that are built from community leaders there, and that's been really helpful. But I think it's also for us being unapologetic and open, right? And like, I think it was Dr. Brown who said, this is a new way of engaging, and it is a little disconcerting, but what we've approached it as listening and learning. And so building relational trust is one initiative at a time, one relationship at a time, whether it's what I call the wonderful triad of parent, teacher, and student, that you're building those relationships every day. And so it's recursive, it's ongoing, it's one program at a time, but it's also looking at and being grateful for the leadership. So we have a wonderful superintendent that really said, I want to hear from our families so we can develop that two-way communication and do it authentically. And so we were able to do those parent cafes, and that's really what it was designed to do. And I think the courageous thing that we did, which was a little different, is we broke it into affinity groups. And so, we did English language, and we did the Black Parent Cafe, and we did the Exceptional Children's Cafe for children with disabilities. And the families all don't share the same experience. It wasn't a monolithic conversation. It was very diverse, but there was also the opportunity to build relationships parent to parent. And there was also an opportunity for us to look at some shared experiences and how to help each other, even in our challenges. So relational trust is an amazing thing to think about, that we have to do it in an ongoing way.
Thank you. And I think you summed up like a lot of the undercurrent of this question and the conversation a lot about, we have to make sure we're listening first. We have to make sure that there's two-way communication. We have to be taking in as much information, if not more, than we're sending out. And then also just being authentic and telling the community, hey, we are here for you and we can provide these things, so that there's no kind of confusion about who should go where, when, and things like that. Really sounds like it might quell some potential anxiety like in your families, especially in this kind of precedented time. And that kind of turns us to our next question, which is, kind of a big one. And want to hear your candid responses about this. We see equity as a process that results in each student having the resources, time, and support they need to be successful, right? We know that we are going through this process of creating equity, but it hasn't necessarily got us to the exact outcomes that we're looking for yet. What are some of the barriers that you all face in your districts? And I think this has been touched on over time in this conversation. So also, kind of, how have you fought to significantly break down those barriers or hop over them, or whatever your strategy is? And I'll turn to Ms. Gillison to start.
Thank you for that question. And woo, that's the roughest question out of the whole set of questions. But first, I would like to share that this year, Dr. Dixon has hired a chief equity officer who is actually looking at all of our practices and those type of things. And we meet, her and I, we meet every Friday, just bouncing ideas off of each other. When we talk about equity, something as small as, because with engagement, there's no one size fits all. And a lot of times people look at it from this myopic lens, and that's not going to work. It's about something as simple as communicating with families. Now, yes, we are in this technological age, but you can't just send emails out to everyone because everyone, they don't utilize emails the way we do. Like I have to look at my email like every 10 minutes because I have a new one. Our families, we have to look at various ways to communicate. So that is still, people call it snail mail, but I really respect the US Post Office because that's where my mom retired from. But we got to use the Postal Service, you know, to send information out. We have to use phone calls. You know, we have to get out and knock on doors. So when you talk about equity, you have to look at this broad array of families and that information that you get from building trust and relationships and looking at situations from their shoes, from where they sit and trying to address it. It's ongoing. We aren't there yet, but we're wrestling with it every day. So I at least want to put that out there. We are wrestling with it every day. We're looking to get better. I am going to listen to the other panelists and take notes. And I did want to say to Superintendent Brown, Buen on City Council, please tell Buen I said hello. And he actually used to be on my engagement committee. And then he defected and went to Reynoldsburg. So tell him I said hello in that manner.
Yes, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate you couching this equity question just at the very base level of communication, right? If we're not doing fair communications equitably, how can we even move beyond that? People don't have the same information as others. So that's such a great starting point for this conversation. I'm wondering now, Mr. Balzer, as you think about equity in your district, what are some of the challenges you faced, and how have you guys thought about those?
Well, first I want to make sure everyone can hear me because I did see in the side notes that they were having some trouble. So I've turned the volume up as far as I can, and I'll talk extra loud today. You might have remembered in the news that the opioid epidemic sort of blossomed down in South Central Ohio and worked its way up through the state. And what we discovered very quickly, and we really didn't see it coming, it just happened, and we couldn't figure out how all these children were coming to us experiencing this trauma, neglect, and just disconnection from regular social functions that we'd seen in the past. And when we realized what had happened, we decided we had to take some action quickly. So this is where I partnered with Mr. Kitchen at the ESC, and we sat down and invited every county resource that we had available to come together that serve children, and to make resources available to all the kids through all the small rural districts in Ross County. We formed this Children's Alliance. And basically, we all realized that some of us duplicate each other's services, or we aren't aware of each other's services that could be provided on behalf of children. And we were able to coordinate this very efficiently. We have a sheet of resources now that includes over 90 phone numbers, and we can give that as a convenient takeaway to any parent, any family, grandparents who need these resources for their kids. And we found that equity has greatly improved, not just in the Adena School District, but across the county, because everyone's aware of each other now, and we know how to coordinate better in these broad geographic areas. We can share information. We can track kids as they move from one district to another to help them acclimate in a new district. We know how to share services that people will need to know about. It has been a real improvement in the lives of children down in this part of the state as far as being able to function. And you know, the challenges are huge when it comes to the addiction problem. And we have seen education improve. We've seen disciplinary incidents drop. And we have seen parents begin to reach out to us for assistance, and that's all great. You know, we see great things happening with that. And so, you know, we're very pleased with that, and advise everyone, if you can, to try to do the same thing in your counties.
Thank you for that response, and I appreciate the context that you provided for your experience and for your work. And I think again that is another great point. You know, this question of equity and equity to resources, equity to opportunity doesn't start at school. School is a great place where we can try to mitigate or fix some of those things, but it takes a village, like you're saying. So, you said 80 or 90 phone numbers on one resource sheet.
It's kind of funny because in the 1980s, when I first started teaching, everyone joked that we ought to have social services have offices in the school building. Now we're begging for social services to come and put their offices in our schools so we can serve the needs of our kids. And we found out it really works. And it's a great thing. And we feel like it's a victory when we get another assistance team brought into the school picture. So, I cannot stress enough, it's a great, worthwhile effort.
Thank you. Now, over to Miss Hunt. How about up in Tiger Nation? How are you kind of tackling issues related to equity?
Well, I do have to start off by saying, Alesia, since you're saying you're doing shout outs, can you tell Dr. Dixon I said hello and wishing her well and thinking about her. She was our superintendent first. I'm not throwing any shade. But yeah, so the issue of equity is huge. It's a huge conversation. And I was sitting here thinking and just making sure that I'm giving credit to where it needs to be due, is it is like an iceberg, right? And so we're still trying to figure out the tip and what lays beneath. And in our district in 2016, we implemented an educational equity policy. And we did a lot of work immediately around the psychosocial context of microaggressions and history of marginalization, and really looking at what supports, oppression and those systems that have been in place. And we've moved on now, in our next iteration of our strategic plan is to really look at implicit bias and those things that are barriers to either supporting the assumptions that we make around families and what people are facing, but also knowing the construct of our district is we have 78% African-American students and 78% white teaching staff. And in America, we are very comfortable in our silos and in our homogenous environments that when you talk about cross-cultural conversations, you have to do it with intention. It is not something that just happens naturally. So these are the pieces that we are looking at when we talk about equity. It's the beliefs, it's the assumptions. In our policy, we make sure that we look at one of the 6 goals is welcoming and empowering families. And so that's part of that equity conversation. It is part of the work. And I believe too, it was important for us to look at that policy and make sure that everybody owns it, knows where they lay within that responsibility. And what's the shared definition? Because it is a ever emerging field of diversity and inclusion, and now we are at equity. Those aren't bygone pieces. They're pieces like bricks that build for us to really look at diversity and inclusivity. And so we're just trying to make sure that we're keeping that continuum going from the 2016 growth and where we were, and making sure that we proclaim it across our district that is still a strategic focus. It's important in the decisions that we make individually as professionals, but also being able to deal with our beliefs and assumptions. And so I feel like it's really layered. But again, it is a pillar for us. And we're continuing with our equity task force that does trainings. Again, it's a task force that's assembled of various stakeholders. So we're fortunate in that area. And then looking to do more, because you really got to keep building sort of the collective energy around equity. It can't exist in a silo. And so how do we continue to change that culture if it's sort of being all over the place? We're trying to be specific. We're looking at our achievement gap. We're looking at our data. We're looking at how do we have these conversations that are informed by when we know better, we do better. And so I think, we're in a good place to keep pushing that. And yes, COVID again said, that's a pre-existing condition. So what are we going to do about it? It's not going away. And as a matter of fact, I think we pulled back the curtain and then shined a light on a lot of the things that we were already struggling with. So, you know, it's ongoing. We say it's ongoing and lifelong.
Thank you so much. And I really love the point that you made about how this type of work, number one, is in like totally connected and it keeps building on each other. And I think that really highlights the point that if we know that diversity, inclusion, and other associated outcomes or outputs are directly related to equity and building those processes really well, then this really has to be the focus. So I appreciate you really putting that front and center for us. And of course, I'll move last to Mr. Brown. How are you guys addressing this in Reynoldsburg?
Well, initially, it's important to understand the context of historically in education, we tended to make a whole lot of assumptions about who people are, where they're from, and what they need. And we also try to define what those things they need are without actually facilitating conversation with those folks. I think where we are now has revealed that we need to flip that and look directly to families to say what it is that tell us what you need, and we help you in that regard. I also think we've had struggles in education in general, and looking at things through a deficit lens as opposed to looking at the assets people bring to the table and giving them an opportunity to use their strengths to build upon anything they want to do as they move forward. So those are some of the things in terms of conversation that kind of starts things. Ms. Hunt said perfectly, the historical perspective of barriers and oppression, those things have to be understood, because it's really easy to say, oh, racism, sexism, those are things of the past. Well, first of all, they're not. Secondly, they were purposefully baked into the cake when all of these things were put in place. We're talking legislatively, we're talking legally, we're talking structurally within schools and other entities. And it's important to make that recognition. If we don't understand that context, it's very easy to sit back and say, oh, well, slavery was a long time ago. Well, the implications of that still exist, and it's important to have those conversations. In terms of what we try to do in the district is, one, we've begun having those conversations. We had them in some ways my first 3 years. This summer, after things that took place in the spring, we began to be much more purposeful and explicit in terms of having those conversations. We held an equity symposium for our teachers 2 weeks ago. That was outstanding. We had presenters from across the country and from Ohio State that were here virtually to give our teachers and our staff some understanding of what those pieces are. We talked about not only racial and social justice, we also talked about underrepresentation and gifted programs of students from certain populations. We talked about our LGBTQ population. We're going to be talking about our special education population. It's important that we see this not as a thing to do, but a thing that we become, because it does build upon itself. It continues to grow. And if we see this as just checking some boxes to say we've done some things, we're never, ever going to be in a position to do what's right by kids long term. COVID's kind of put us in a place where we've got to question what we do. You know, for 100+ years, the educational model has looked essentially the same. We haven't changed much. This is very different, and it's pushing us and challenging us. But we've said if we start the 2021-22 school year the same way we ended the 18-19 school year, shame on us, because we've done something very, very wrong in that regard. This has given us an opportunity to do something pretty special to change education and what the landscape of it is for the long term.
Powerful words from Mr. Brown. So I appreciate that perspective, and something stuck out that we put in the chat. Speaking of equity, Mr. Brown said, this is not a thing we do, it is a thing we become. And as we come close to the end of our time today, I hope that everyone takes that with them out of this conversation. We did have one question come in, and we have just about 2 minutes to think about this. And this is mostly directed towards Ms. Hunt with the idea of affinity groups. We kind of have we know what affinity groups are. We know kind of why they're helpful to the participants in terms of, you know, feeling the ability to share like more things and like that. How has Cleveland Heights, University Heights taken what's happened in those meetings and applied that to their work?
Wow, you are just putting a pulse on where I am right now. What we found, especially with this pandemic, is people had this overwhelming sense of isolation. And so I think the power of when we did them, because we have to give credit for a conversation that begins, is to also empower families to be able to make their own cafes or connect in their own individual ways. And we're seeing that with students. Students are in these virtual lessons, but we want them to be able to connect with each other. And so I'm trying to figure out now, how do we ratchet that up? We knew people wanted to keep the conversations going. And so the next sort of 2.0 of these virtual affinity group cafe conversations, I think it's about empowering and bringing people back together to develop those solutions. Instead of us trying to figure out how do we do it, giving again the power to the people and the power to parents to say, what does it look like? What programming should come from this? What initiatives do we need to develop that we can support you in? And so my hope is to then take it to some of those larger mechanisms like our wonderful PTAs, or like our, we're a minority student achievement district. How do we take that initiative and really look at, those are mechanisms in place with supports and programs. And so I think Affinity Group 2.0 would be more, how do we collect those voices from those parent groups and really build something systemically that they can continue to embolden and keep thriving. But it is exactly where I'm at right now. And I want to give credit to our superintendent, Ms. Elizabeth Kirby, who doesn't shy away from really looking at how do you connect with families and what can we do to really hear them and make sure that we're being responsive to that.
Thank you so much for that on-the-spot response. We have run up against our time. I do want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists and our distinguished guests here. When we were putting together this panel discussion, this is basically the best outcome I could have asked for. Thank you for not shying away from any questions. Thank you for being honest and open with all of us. And I think everyone will have something to take away from this day. So if you could please join me in thanking our panelists in the chat. And we will be moving on to our final session of the day. It starts at about 2 p.m. Just a reminder, all of these sessions will be recorded and hosted as soon as possible on the Summit website. With that, I unfortunately cannot leave this room open much longer because I have to go moderate another session. But I just want to say one more time, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your expertise. This was a powerful panel.